A 17-year-old boy walked into court alone, determined to prove his innocence, armed with nothing but a stack of notes and the memory of a father who died fighting the same system. But when the judge mocked him and the courtroom laughed, could he still turn the tide in his favor? If you believe the truth deserves a voice, no matter who speaks it, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Now, let's go back to the moment it all began in a quiet southern town where time seemed to move slower, and justice even slower. One courtroom buzzed with a tension you could almost feel in your chest. The wooden benches creaked under the weight of curious eyes, most of them white, most of them convinced they already knew how this story would end. At the center stood a boy, 17-year-old Jalen Holt, slim, dark-skinned, dressed in a second-hand suit 2 sizes too big, borrowed from a cousin who had worn it once to a funeral. Jalen didn't have a lawyer, money, or anyone in that courtroom who believed in him. But he had something no one else could see: conviction. His hands trembled slightly as he sat down with a worn-out folder of handwritten notes. He looked so out of place, so young, so alone, and yet there was a quiet fire behind his eyes, like he'd already been judged long before today and was used to standing alone. Across the courtroom, the prosecutor, Victor Langston, sharp suit, sharper tongue, leaned back in his chair with a smug grin. To him, this wasn't a trial, it was a formality. Then came the voice that cut through the silence like a blade. Judge Clara Sterling, late 50s, stern, her face carved by decades of authority, adjusted her glasses, narrowed her eyes at Jalen, and spoke with the cold finality of someone who'd already made up her mind. Mr. Holt, you've chosen to represent yourself in this matter. Grand theft auto and resisting arrest are serious charges. This is not a debate club. Do you truly think you're qualified to stand before this court? A faint chuckle rose from the gallery, a scoff from the prosecutor's table. Jalen didn't flinch. He slowly rose to his feet, cleared his throat, and replied, "No, Your Honor, I'm not qualified. But I am innocent, and today, that's what I came to prove." The room fell still. The judge raised an eyebrow, the smirks faded, but only for a moment. Because what no one in that courtroom realized yet was that this boy they were so eager to dismiss was about to make them question everything they thought they knew. The first to take the stand was Officer Nathan Brooks, middle-aged, buzz-cut, shoulders squared like he never forgot his Army days. His voice was firm, confident, like he'd done this 100 times before and never once been challenged. "I saw the defendant," he said, leaning into the driver's side window, holding what looked like a tool. He was fumbling with the wires, attempting to hotwire the vehicle. "When I identified myself as law enforcement," he ran. A few heads nodded in the gallery. Sounded convincing, clean, neat. But Jalen was already scribbling notes. When it was his turn, he stood slowly, walked to the front, and faced Officer Brooks. Not with hostility, but with a calm, deliberate steadiness that caught even the judge off guard. "Officer Brooks," Jalen began, "you said you saw me fumbling with wires. Can you tell the court how far away you were when you observed this?" Brooks didn't hesitate. "Roughly 20 feet. At night." "Yes, it was dark." Jalen nodded. "And the window, was it rolled down?" "No, closed." "So, from 20 feet away, in the dark, through a closed car window, you could see me, a black teenager in a dark hoodie, fumbling with internal wiring?" A murmur swept through the courtroom. The judge lifted her eyes from her notepad, watching more closely now. Jalen didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Your Honor," he said, "with permission, I'd like to approach the witness." The judge gave a small nod. Jalen walked to Officer Brooks and placed a laminated photo in front of him. "This is a photo of the exact car in question. Can you show the court where the ignition wires are located?" Brooks frowned, studied the photo, then pointed hesitantly to the dashboard area, deep inside, behind the steering column. Jalen turned to face the jury, his voice steady but weighted. "The ignition wires are here, hidden deep inside the dash, not visible from outside the car. And yet Officer Brooks claims he saw me fumbling with them in the dark, from 20 feet away, through a closed window." Another wave of whispers. A few jurors leaned forward now. The prosecutor stood, flustered. Objection. This is speculation. But before the judge could respond, Jalen turned back calmly. Your Honor, if the state's key witness is basing his accusation on something physically impossible, how can his entire testimony be trusted? There was silence, and then the judge spoke. Overruled. Continue, Mr. Holt. And just like that, the mood in the courtroom shifted. For the first time, someone wasn't just hearing Jalen, they were listening. The next witness was Evelyn Carver. The registered owner of the black sedan Jalen was accused of stealing. She walked to the stand with the firm, practiced grace of someone used to being heard and rarely questioned. Her hair was perfectly pinned, her blazer crisp, but her jaw tight, her eyes cold. She didn't glance once in Jalen's direction. She told the court she had parked her car in front of her house the night before. When she woke the next morning, it was gone. Hours later, police found it with a young black teenager inside. To her, the story was complete. But when Jalen stood, the room quieted. He didn't challenge her directly, didn't raise his voice. Instead, he asked gently, "Had you seen the car being taken?" She hadn't. She was asleep. Were the windows broken? No, all intact. Any sign of forced entry? None. Jalen paused, looked at her, then asked as if an afterthought, "Who else has access to your car keys?" A flicker, barely noticeable, but her eyes shifted for the first time. "Just me," she replied. "And my husband." That was all he needed. Jalen turned to the judge politely and clearly and requested to call a new witness, Mr. Leonard Carver. The prosecutor jumped up, objecting. This witness hadn't been on any list. This was unexpected, improper, a disruption. But Jalen's response was calm as always. Your Honor, the truth doesn't always arrive on schedule. If the prosecution missed it, that doesn't mean it doesn't belong here. Judge Sterling watched him closely, then slowly nodded. And just like that, Leonard Carver was called to the stand. Tall, reserved, and visibly uncomfortable. He moved with hesitation, his steps heavy, his gaze low as he was sworn in. Jalen stood still, giving the man space, then asked simply if he had access to the car keys. Leonard nodded, yes, he did. Then came the question that shifted everything. Did you lend the car to anyone the night it went missing? Leonard hesitated, his hands clenched in his lap. Across the courtroom, his wife sat perfectly still, like a statue made of pressure. He didn't look at her when he answered. I lent it to my nephew, Theo. He needed it for a date. The words hit the room like a crack of thunder. Audible gasps, murmurs. Someone whispered, "You're kidding." Evelyn Carver didn't move, but the flush rising in her cheeks said everything. Jalen stayed rooted in place, his voice steady. So, to clarify, on the night in question, the car wasn't stolen. It was loaned by you, and no one told the police this. Leonard looked down. No, I didn't think it was important. Didn't think it was important, Jalen repeated, turning toward the jury. His tone unchanged, but his words heavier now. The entire foundation of the prosecution's case rests on the idea that I stole a car. But the car was never stolen. There was no break-in, no damage, no criminal intent. Just a detail left out, ignored, or hidden. The prosecutor stood again, clearly agitated. Your Honor, the defendant was still found in the vehicle without permission, but Jalen turned to the bench before the judge could reply. Your Honor, if the car wasn't stolen, then this is not grand theft auto. And if this isn't grand theft auto, then what exactly is it? There was silence. Even Judge Sterling didn't respond right away. She looked at Leonard Carver, then at her notes, then back at Jalen. Something was unraveling, and she knew it. Jalen gave a respectful nod and returned to his seat. As Mr. Carver stepped down, the tension in the courtroom shifted again. Not just in the air, but in the eyes of the people watching. The smirks were gone. So were the whispers of certainty. Now there was doubt and maybe, just maybe, something else, respect. The courtroom had grown still after Leonard Carver's confession. What began as a confident prosecution was starting to look careless, or worse, conveniently selective. But Jalen wasn't done. He stood once more and called his next witness, Theo Carver, the nephew who had borrowed the car that night. Theo was thin, awkward, barely 18. He shuffled to the stand with the kind of nervous energy that made you wonder if he'd ever spoken in public before. His eyes darted around the room, never quite settling, especially not on his aunt as he sat. Jalen walked slowly across the courtroom, not asking questions right away, just letting the silence press down. Then, gently, he asked Theo to explain what happened that night. The boy spoke. He admitted his uncle had lent him the car, said he used it for a quick date, nothing out of the ordinary. But afterward, he parked it a few blocks from home and walked inside, figuring he'd bring it back the next morning. When he returned, the car was gone. He didn't tell anyone, didn't call the police, hadn't even mentioned it to his uncle. Why? Because he was scared. Scared of being blamed, scared of what people might assume, scared in the simplest way of getting in trouble. The room was quiet. Then Jalen turned back to the judge and asked the question that had been hanging in the air since the trial began. If the car wasn't stolen, why was I arrested? There was no answer, at least not yet. But Jalen had come prepared. He asked for a piece of video evidence to be shown. Not the one from the security camera provided by police, but a different clip, one recorded by his best friend Cale from across the street that very night. The screen at the front of the courtroom flickered on, grainy, unsteady, but clear enough. It showed Jalen approaching the car slowly, cautiously. The door appeared slightly open. He leaned in, looked around, no sudden movements, no attempt to flee. And then, just as suddenly, a man in plain clothes rushed toward him from the shadows. No badge, no warning, just a voice yelling something unintelligible and the blur of movement. Jalen turned and ran. Gasps echoed in the courtroom. The camera shook, followed the scene for only a moment more, then cut off. Jalen stepped forward, facing the jury. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't need to. He simply said what was now plain to see. I didn't resist arrest. I feared for my life. The man who came at me gave no sign he was a police officer. No uniform, no badge, just aggression from the dark. The silence in the courtroom grew heavier. At the very back of the gallery, a woman sat frozen, still in place. She had been there the entire time, quiet and unseen. It was Jalen's mother. She hadn't wanted him to go through with this. She had begged him not to. She had seen what happened to men who dared challenge the system. She had buried one, her husband, Jalen's father. But now, as she watched her son stand tall, not with anger but with truth, she couldn't hold it in anymore. A tear slid down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. Jalen didn't see her cry, but maybe he felt it, because when he returned to his seat, the courtroom no longer saw a boy defending himself. They saw a system cracking and a young man, calmly, patiently, pushing at it. The courtroom was still. Not the kind of stillness that comes from routine, but the kind that follows a shift, subtle but irreversible. Something had changed. The accusations had cracked, the evidence had thinned, and now all that remained was the question no one dared to ask aloud. Who was Jalen Holt? Really? Not on paper, not in police reports, but underneath it all. Jalen stood once more, not with urgency, not with defiance. He moved as though he were carrying something fragile, and he was. From the inside of his weathered folder, he drew a small, creased envelope, folded so many times the edges had worn soft like cloth. A letter, faded, fragile, written by a man who no longer walked this earth. Jalen didn't raise it up for drama, didn't show it to the room. He simply held it gently with both hands. Then he looked toward the bench. Your Honor, he said, voice steady but low. This letter was written by my father from prison before he died. He wanted me to read it when I was old enough to understand. Judge Sterling didn't say a word. She simply gave a faint nod. Jalen unfolded the letter slowly, like unfolding memory itself. He didn't read it all, just enough. His voice didn't tremble, but the pause between sentences told a deeper story. My son, if one day you understand the law, not just the words but the weight, I hope you use it to lift someone else. Not to get ahead, but to pull someone back from being forgotten. Even if that someone is you. He stopped there, but the silence that followed said more than any line could. Jalen didn't return to his seat. He looked out toward the jury, the judge, the rows of silent faces, and then, gently, his voice filled the room again. Not reciting, not debating, just speaking, the kind of speaking that came from a place deeper than courage. I didn't stand up here because I thought I could win. I stood up because I couldn't keep watching people like my father disappear. My mother told me not to do this. She said, "Don't fight them, they won't let you win." And honestly, I believed her. He paused, then looked toward the back of the room where his mother sat. Hands folded, shoulders straight. Her eyes unreadable but her presence unshakable. Jalen turned back to the room. "But I didn't come here to win. I came here to be seen, not just as a defendant, but as a son, as a boy who didn't steal a car but inherited a burden." A few jurors shifted in their seats. One of them, an older woman with silver hair, lowered her gaze and exhaled. In that quiet space, Jalen's mother closed her eyes. She had watched her husband walk into a courtroom and never return. She had raised a child in a world that warned him to stay silent. She had begged him not to do this. And now, watching him stand, not to lash out, but to lift something greater than himself. She felt the sting of tears. But she didn't wipe them away. She let them fall not for pain but for pride. Judge Sterling hadn't written a word in several minutes. Her pen lay still, her gaze locked on the boy standing before her. Not with the dispassion of a judge, but the recognition of a human being who had just witnessed something real. And maybe, for the first time in a very long time, she didn't see a docket number. She saw a child standing where no child should ever have to stand. Jalen said nothing more. He folded the letter back slowly, carefully, placed it inside the folder, then returned to his seat. No applause, no gasp, just silence. The kind of silence that doesn't ask for permission, the kind that settles into the corners of a room and stays there. Because what had just happened wasn't an argument. It was the truth. And finally, everyone in that room had heard it. After all the witnesses, all the facts, and all the unraveling, there was one story left to tell, his. The judge asked the question plainly, formality more than invitation. "Mr. Holt, do you wish to testify on your own behalf?" Jalen nodded once. "Yes, Your Honor, I do." He stood, not quickly, not with flair, but with the kind of calm that only comes after carrying the weight of silence for too long. As he walked toward the witness stand, a hush settled across the room. Not fear, not drama, but something quieter. Attention rooted in curiosity, in conscience, in that uneasy space where perception begins to shift. He was sworn in, sat, adjusted the microphone with care, then rested his palms on the surface before him, grounding himself. He didn't begin with emotion, he began with the truth. He told them how he'd been walking home that night, after a long shift at the gas station where he worked weekends. He didn't drive, never had, couldn't afford a car. So walking home through dim streets was nothing new. What was new was the black sedan. Parked just a little crooked, driver's door slightly ajar. No lights on, no sign of anyone nearby. It didn't feel right. Something about it looked out of place, like someone had left in a hurry, like something had gone wrong. He slowed his steps, walked closer. He didn't touch it, not at first. He leaned in, looked inside. An old backpack in the back seat. A soda can in the cup holder. Glove box cracked open. No broken windows, no alarm. Jalen paused in his story here, not for effect, but because the memory was sharp, clear, and he wanted every word to land exactly where it belonged. He said he didn't know why he leaned in further. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe concern, maybe instinct, some small voice saying, "Check before you move on." What he didn't expect was the voice behind him. Shouting, aggressive, no warning, no context, just a sudden surge of sound, and then a man charging straight toward him. Not a uniform, not a badge, jeans, hoodie, civilian clothes, and anger. That's all he saw. Jalen's voice didn't rise as he spoke, but the room felt tighter with every sentence.